What's up, guys? Joe Enders coming back at you with another episode of the Interviews with Joe show. That's what it's going to be for now. Still haven't come up with the name yet. Leave some comments below too about what you think the name should be, because I'm actually curious on your opinions on that. I've been really thinking about calling the show Far Right or Far Wrong, but I don't know if that's a good idea. I think it's funny. But we'll brainstorm more ideas in the future. Leave comments below on what you think it should be called. And honestly, if you're a troll, leave a comment too, because I could use a good laugh. Like, just give a really funny name that I don't even want to hear. But anyways, today we're going to be talking about Christianity and the arts. And I have a really special guest here today to talk to us about Christianity and the arts. He's the drummer in the band 20 Pound Sledge. And he's the former host of the show ZoNation for PJTV and the current host of the Zo Loft. I have with me today AlfonZo, Rachel. Good to have you.
Right on, man. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that I think most conservatives are, at least somewhat socially conscious of is how Hollywood is so, predominantly leftist in all of their musical scenes, the Hollywood scene, all these different art scenes. It always seems to be moving towards the left. And when we look at a lot of the greatest artists in history, like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, a lot of these older people that used to do these great paintings and make these interesting inventions, and we also have Mozart and Bach. These people were right-leaning. They were Christians. They were Christians. They were proud of their country. They believed their country was exceptional, and they showed that through their art. Now, I want to know is, how did we get here, basically, in the United States, to where it's actually the opposite, where music is pushing us towards being ashamed of the United States, and moreover, teaching us to be less American, and all these other issues.
Wow, and for really quick, man, I like that. What was that? Far right or far wrong?
Far right or far wrong? Yeah.
Something about it kind of maybe needs to be condensed a little bit, or I guess another thing that kind of rings is that it almost sounds like a question. Like, are you asking a question, far right or far wrong? So it kind of leaves it, open to a little bit of ribbing, But I don't know. You can work with. That's a good basis to work from. But let's see. With the arts, man, especially in America. Let's start with America being the land of the free, right? People take a lot of liberties with that, right? And this is where liberalism. See, the thing about liberalism, man, freedom is a very, very dangerous environment for liberalism, right? You would think that liberalism means liberated and liberty and all that sort of stuff. No, it's the total opposite. If you're in a place of oppression and you live in a system of oppression, a dogmatic oppression, a system of oppression and stuff like that, liberalism will thrive for the moment. That's it. Because of course in order for you to be liberated, you're gonna have to take liberties with that doctrine. You're gonna have to, right? In order to achieve an agenda of freedom. But once that happens, you have to put liberty to rest. And I talk about this in my pending book, A Solid Right Cross. Once that happens, once you are liberated, once you've had your revolution and all that sort of stuff, you have to put liberalism to rest. Because when you have freedom, liberalism will fester in an environment of freedom. You'll lose sight of what it is to be free, and it becomes a great distortion. Now, bringing that to where we are in America, when people have this concept of what it is, America, the land of the free and stuff like that, people don't have really a clear understanding of what that means, right? So they feel like they can take liberties, they can take the freedom to do whatever they want. Well, does this play out in the arts? Because in art, well, it's like I have the freedom of just total expression. I don't want to be inhibited by it. Okay? I want to be able to say whatever I want. I want to be able to showcase whatever it is that I want, and there should be no boundaries to that. All right. So when you have when a person takes this idea of freedom and they apply it to their art, well, what you're going to end up with is many different distortions or many different perspectives of what freedom is, and they've deviated from this standard. And of course, that's going to lead to twisted ideas of what freedom is, and trying to make somebody else out to be the bad guy for what their idea of freedom is. And that's where, and right now, the bad guys of freedom are going to be your corporations, your Republicans, the church, and the military.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and that kind of goes and explains a little bit why we went from the Mona Lisa to I believe it's called PISS Christ, which is the crucifix in a jar of urine,
Mm-hmm.
and that's in a prominent art museum in the in New York City. And and that's the sort of thing you get like this idea of freedom is like, yes, you're free to exercise your freedom that way. Yes, that's freedom of speech, freedom of expression, blah, blah, blah. But what I see from that is a reflection of the culture that person was brought up in. And that culture has clearly made religion the enemy. And I believe that making religion the enemy makes you someone who's exercising your freedom improperly. And I would disagree with that, and I would oppose that at just about every turn socially. Now, we seem to be, the trajectory seems to be going in that direction right now. As far in art, it does. I would say that the country is a little bit different. I actually see the country looking back to older artists now. People are listening to old metal from the 80s now, for example. Like Metallica has been really big lately. A lot of people have been listening to that because it's simply a different era of music with a different sort of message to it than current music. Because now current music it's all about, two things. It's about love and money, and I don't mean real love. I mean like hedonistic love.
Yeah.
So, eros would be the word I'm looking for. It's the Greek word for erotic love. The problems I'm seeing, at least in the West, is that they do have a misunderstanding of love. And I've talked to a couple people about this. I specifically brought it up when I debated Richard Spencer on his view that he doesn't love everybody. So, and I'm like, well, you should, and you're wrong for not. But furthermore, I think that the biggest thing that we're running into right now with art is the idea that the truth is how you express it and not what it is. And I'm curious, do you agree with that?
Well, the truth is, let me see if did I catch your statement right? The truth is the truth. The truth is in how you express it.
No, I'm saying that that's the current understanding in the artistic community in the United States, is that the truth is how I express it, not actually not an objective standard.
I'm not a lawyer. But one of the things that I've been made to understand is that it's not so much about how the facts that you may have in your case. It's how compelling your argument is. Are you able to? It's like you can take something that's just total BS, but can you sell it? Right? Is really what it comes down to. And so in that, yeah, I would have to agree with you. I would, and of course we're using the term truth loosely. Right? There's, of course, your truth and there's my truth. There's no such thing. There's one truth. Yeah. It comes down to, it's not about whether it's true or not. It's whether you're able to get somebody to believe it, and accept it as truth. And right now, where liberalism is concerned, they have dominated the industry of make-believe and making people believe what they say is true. The problem with liberals, as I've said before, is that, in this industry of make-believe, they don't know when to clock out. It's like they do their shift of making make-believe and then they take that into their normal living. It's like these people, between, their thirst for fantasy and escapism, whether it's, creating products or consuming products, whatever substance that may be, these people are hung up on escaping reality. And yet we're going to, assume to be lectured by these people about reality. They're right there in front of our face, promoting escapism. Reality is their enemy. They're freaking allergic to reality. All right. And they're trying to drag us into that with them and trying to lecture us about what reality is. we ain't having it. And that's why conservatives, they really need to explore. And if you can't be artistic yourself, for God's sake, support, you know, the defense mechanism to do it. You know, because this is an area where we're very, very deficient.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I'm seeing too, is that like, and you can't even go to the movies without getting this social messaging, and it's actually to me it gets to a point at which it's actually almost like offensive, like in Wonder Woman, for example. When I saw that one, I saw they had this Muslim character in the movie, and they're trying to lecture about how hated he is and stuff like that, and I'm like, that's not how it was. I'm sorry. That's not how it was in that period of time. A lot of people don't know this. The Ottoman Empire, where most of the Arab Muslims lived, was an ally to the Axis powers, or whatever it would have been called then. I think it was Axis. But the opposing side, they had an alliance with Germany. They didn't hate each other. They weren't not allowed to act. And it's almost lecturing me. It's like you're telling me to have shame on myself right now for no reason at all whatsoever. And you need to lecture me on this in the movie like this. And that's not, to me, that's not art. That's activism. And I think that activism can be artistic, but in that way, it's just to me, it seems like it's just not. It seems like it's more of a prod. When you go to experience art, you don't want the artist sitting there with a cattle prod poking at you while you're trying to enjoy some artistic, because there was amazing parts of that movie.
Sure.
But they have to hit you with that cattle prod right there and let you know that you're terrible real quick.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it was a fun flick, man. I saw it eventually. And and there's this propaganda of falsities in there. You know, it's like, look, if you're gonna proselytize, I don't mind proselytize, but proselytizing truth. You know, and this stuff actually is like, like you said, it's like they're Muslim in there. It's like, they're gonna have this great relationship. It's like, no, if this is a real Muslim, it'd be like the first thing he said to one was, "Where you hijab at?" That's a lot of leg you showing. It's like, I ain't following you anywhere. So and I think the thing that's funny is, when you have feminists who believe that, war is not the answer, yet it's okay for this island to have a bunch of warrior women on there. It's like, they solve problems with war tactics, not diplomacy. And, and these people are anti, no torture. And it's like, look, I don't think torture is cool either. I personally don't think that waterboarding is torture. I believe it's very uncomfortable and can be very effective. But it's like, you guys are going to sit there and talk about no torture, but yet it's okay for this woman to take a lasso out and put it on somebody and make them feel an extreme sense of heat until they tell the truth. That's okay, and that's heroic. But so I think there's like some very much inconsistencies in there. But but it's effective. All this stuff has just been inundating the culture for years, from music. And we're looking at like what, comedy tours. People are ramping up comedy tours because they want to get out there and they want to talk about how evil the Trump administration is and stuff like that. I mean, come on.
It's not comedy. It's so bad. Like the best one was what was her name? Demi Lovato. I don't know if you've ever seen her skit about. She does this thing and it's like it's called her dad's Google history, and she literally all she does. This is all she does. She just goes like, how to walk the dog, and then she just stops and goes like, dad's Google history, da, 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 da. And then she goes to the next thing. That's it. That's the whole skit.
Dang. Well, I'll pass on that.
And she's a short-haired, clearly socially active feminist. So I mean, like, it's, and the other one is Lena Dunham. They think she's funny too for some reason. Like, okay,
yeah. I've caught wind of her.
But it's because you can smell the scandal coming off of her.
But but that's where it is, man. And like I said, it's an industry of make believe, and that's what sells. I mean, people want a sense of escapism, and a lot of this stuff, it appeals to people's sense of self-righteousness. It appeals to their selfishness. With these actors and with these musicians, man, they're appealing to a very huge audience. It's an easy industry if you can get into it. All right, if you can get into the industry, once you're there, it's an easy market to be successful in, because there's so many people out there who idolize their sense of self-righteousness and who idolize their selfishness, and they want to be pandered to by these celebrities. So, you know, of course, they're going to make entertainment based on what their idea of freedom is, like we were talking about earlier. And the idea of freedom is, hey, satisfy your selfishness. Do you? You only live once. You got to look out for number one, and you got to do things for you while being under the guise of having community interest. You know, that's the self. See, it's this duality of, you got to play up the selfishness, but you also got to play up the self-righteousness. You got to make it look like you care and stuff like that, when really it's all about, hey, I want to do what satisfies me.
Yeah, and you know, I think the greatest example of this was when what is it, Kathy Griffin attacked Kevin Hart recently.
Oh man,
you heard about that? She says to this poor guy, who I really respect for what he said. She says that you're not a good person. You don't care about the black community because you're not using any social activism in your comedy. And I'm like, and then Kevin Hart's like, I'm not in it for that. I'm a comedian. Why do you want your politics from me? Like, and I feel bad for him, because he wants his fan base. He likes his fan base. He doesn't care about the politics of people. And that's a true entertainer, in my opinion. Now, I have no problem with there being those social activists, but at least they can at least be funny first. You got to worry about being funny before you could be funny and socially conscious. And right. I don't see that. I don't see that in comedy. I don't see this in acting. I don't see these people being good actors and socially conscious. What's her name? The woman from Ghostbusters, Leslie. I forget, it was Leslie something. She was she's just a horrible actor. She's not funny, and they put her. Yeah, but she's in there because she's a feminist. You know, so.
Man, I tell you what, you know. With comedy, if a person wants to, you know, center their comedy around, you know, being political and stuff, I'm sure there's great, you know, politically oriented comedians and whatnot, or, you know, socially conscious, or if that's what they want to call themselves, you know, that's fine. But Kathy Griffin, you know, is fully letting her fascism show. It's like, man, I mean, she's really blind to it. It's like, you gonna try to dictate to how Kevin Hart is gonna put together his content, really? You know, and you know, and she has every right to question his content. That's how freedom of speech works. If you want to question somebody's motives or their content or their product or whatever, their ideas, fine, go ahead. But that person is also free to disagree with you. But she's gonna sit there and try to dictate to what he's supposed to be talking about, not only as a person, but as a black person. It's like, okay, now you also gonna try to tell him what qualifies him as a black person. It's like, you know, girl, you need to, you know, go someplace and scratch. Yeah. So
yeah, seriously, and it's like, it's going up to, like, she's a white woman going up to a black man and telling him, look, if you want to be a black man, you need to be this way. I'm like,
right.
I'm not.
It don't work. And I don't care. And I don't care what a person's persuasion is. I don't care if it was another black person saying it. It's like, excuse me. You know, you gonna sit there and whine about the oppression of white folks. Meanwhile, you as a black person gonna sit here and try to be oppressive yourself and dictate to how I'm gonna conduct myself. You know, it's like, you know, when you have, you know, blacks trying to, you know, tell another person what qualifies as being black, and it's like, look, you know, that is none of your business. And for me, you know, speaking for myself, the kingdom comes before my country, my color, chromosomes, anything else. You're just like, look, I'm not out there trying to be, you know, black person number one. I'm not trying to be American number one, right? I'm just trying to get out there and be a servant of Christ. Because if I really do have affection for my country, the best way through the kingdom, you know, it's not that I'm downplaying America or anything like that. It's like, look, but if I really dig America, the best thing I could do for America is dig the kingdom. That's what preserves it. As far as my color goes, the best way I can represent being black isn't to be out there and talk about pro-black. No, I need to talk about pro-kingdom, right? Me saying, hey, me being black, that ain't gonna get me any respect, right? That's not true. That's gonna go with dust in the wind, man. I need to talk about the kingdom. You know, as far as my craft, that's the same thing. Me being an artist and stuff like that, I don't put my craft before the kingdom. And that's a problem with a lot of artists. Even in conservative circles, they put their craft before the kingdom. They even put their conservatism before the kingdom. That's putting the cart before the horse. Can't do that. You got to put the kingdom before all of that. And that is how you really preserve the integrity in art. That's how you preserve the integrity in your country, in the culture, in your color, in your chromosomes, whatever. What maintains the integrity of that is the kingdom.
You know, and going back to what you were saying before about how these people live in the land of make believe, and this is one of the things. So we lived in the land of make believe at the beginning of the century too, though. And you know what we had? We had J.R.R. Tolkien. We had C.S. Lewis. We had these intellectual juggernauts in fiction writing coming around and creating this fantasy land that meant something more. And I don't see that in art. I've been watching Game of Thrones lately, and it's great story writing, but the message is so horrible behind it all. And the best thing I can say about the show is that it's a joy to watch, but it's a joy to watch because all it does is show you how wicked man truly is.
And that is the truth, because the Bible lets us know that we are desperately wicked, all of us, you know.
Right.
And but you're right, man. Even in the storytelling, but sometimes even with Christians, man, Christians, you know, can kind of shoot themselves in the foot. And you know, it kind of turns into a circular firing squad, because that's when we get into people. That's when piety comes in. You know, and people having a traditional view of what righteousness is and saying that that's biblical and stuff like that. It's like, no, you got to do. It's like these are things that Jesus hated. He didn't like traditionalism. He hated religion, and he could not stand self-righteousness. Right. So Jesus, you know, because it's funny when people, you know, they think of me as a religious person. I'm not religious at all. I'm a servant of Christ. I'm a big fan. All right. That's where I'm at. As far as religion goes, it's like, no, religion is part of what put Jesus on the cross. He could not stand religion. But when people look at these things, and they look at, like, a lot of people, I hear Christians, they don't like, you know, C.S. Lewis, you know, because they don't like him taking mythologies and fantasies and using that as a vehicle to promote Christianity. They don't like these sort of things. Like, man, that is not the way to go. Okay, you don't want to do that. Christ himself says you need to adopt what the children of the age are doing. And Jesus says it himself. It's like, the children of light, my children, you're naive. You don't know how to sell it. All right. You don't know what to do with what you got. However, the children of the age, the secular people, the people who are all about, you know, it's like, I don't want you to be like them, but I need you to use what they use. Right? I need you to do that. So, and Christians, but they get, you know, a lot of times they get into their bubble, you know, and they don't want to explore these things. Or they say that they don't want to be part of the political process because God is still on the throne, and, you know, and he's still in control. It's like, yeah, God's on the throne and he gives instructions, and he's not going to be pleased with his sheep who just lets their freedoms get voted away because you didn't get out there and you didn't take it to the secular culture. You didn't hold the defense for my word. You didn't get out there and you didn't try to sell it. You know, so it's like, we can't be those people.
Yeah, and I think that C.S. Lewis was great at bringing Christians together. I'm not sure I agree with you on Jesus Christ opposing religion. I agree that he would oppose incorrect religions, and I don't mean, and he loved tradition. I think to the extent that it was the tradition of the Holy Spirit, not the tradition of man. And that's where a lot of people get hung up, and you wind up having these, you know, these big groups of people perverting the word of God and using it for horrible things, such as, you know, Hitler, though not being a Christian himself, exploiting Christianity for his own means to get the German people to back him up on things. And this is all well documented stuff. For the audience who doesn't know, Hitler would put you know, Christian symbolism on the belt buckles of Nazi uniforms. Yet in reality, he was trying to do away with Christianity by the end of his reign and replace it with a religion called esoteric Hitlerism. And there's a crazy woman that was a fan of Hitler called Savitri Devi who wrote about that, and bringing it and how it was going to be brought about. The crux of the issue for me is how are we going to push these Christians into selling things in a modern market, and how are we going to overcome the certain facts of marketing such as sex sells, and values are complex and hard to understand and things like that. How are we going to market this in a traditional way to bring about these traditional Christian values, traditions inspired by the Holy Spirit? So don't get it confused with me trying to pervert anything, but in a C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien sense, where you have the wicked men aspect that everything has today, but also the shining moment of the goodness of men as the underlying message, and how to go about being that good Christian with a well-ordered soul.
Right. Now, if really quick, if I can retort really quick.
Yeah.
And you're right about Hitler, man. And that's what I'm saying. And the Bible says itself that people will try to do evils in the name of God. That's one of the reasons why it's one of the commandments. Do not take my name in vain. Don't get out there and sin against other people and say that I told you to do it.
Right.
All right. So this is where God is coming from. And as far as religions go, Jesus himself says, I am the way. Me alone. Not religion. Religion is not the way, because you're gonna have to try to figure out which one. Right? You're always going to be divided on which religion is the way to God. And Jesus says, no. It isn't about religion. It's me. I am the way. It isn't any sort of practices that's going to get it in there. The only thing that you can practice is what I have told you. Religion didn't tell you to do this. It's like God is letting us know that you cannot even build my temple, right? Man cannot build the temple of God. What makes you think that man can build a belief system on God? You can't. Right. So God is letting us know, it's like religion is not the way. My son is the way. It's the only way to heaven. Any religious practice ultimately becomes a meritocracy, and a person assuming that if they abide by these practices, that they can get into heaven. And what that ends up becoming is it becomes a system, and it becomes a system of oppression. And that's where murder and oppression follows. People will be killed in the name of God, violating the commandment to not take his name in vain. But in terms of like, how are we going to sell this in the culture? One of the things that we're having, like you probably might have noticed, I've seen it, maybe you haven't seen it, but in the Christian community, man, there's really talented people, right? I think Christian music has made some incredible leaps and bounds. The musicianship in the church is incredible. Right. I think they got a little bit of a ways to go to catch up, like in terms of, movie making and teleplays and stuff like that. But the potential, of course, is still there. All right. I think the potential is strong. But I think what's lacking, though, man, is there's not that standard. There's still this, even in the music, not so much in the heavy music. Like when you get into the heavier music, man, you hear some stuff where it's like, yeah, that's the Jesus that the Bible is talking about. It ain't this all accepting Jesus, stuff like that. We're talking about a Jesus who shows his love by the retribution that he's going to be bringing, right? Jesus is going to be coming back playing James Brown, the big payback. It's like, I don't know about this all lovey-dovey hippie Jesus that you're talking about, which, don't get me wrong, he is love. Yeah. But if you read the whole New Testament, Jesus of the New Testament makes God the Old Testament look like he's in a really good mood.
Well, what and what is the purest form of love? The purest form of love is agape, the unconditional love that God has for us. That unconditional love that God has for us, that what is the best thing that you could ever do for somebody? And that answer is to send them to heaven.
Right?
The best thing is to send them to heaven. So if you want to send people to heaven, the best way to do that is to tell them when they're doing something wrong or sinful or doing something that's disordering their soul. I mean, I'm like absolutely blown away at these hippie Jesus people. And this is, I see a lot of this with the new Hillsong movement that's going on in New York, in New York City and all across the world. It's silliness. Jesus was not a woman with a beard. I'm sorry.
Right? No,
He's a
that's it.
man. He was a man. And you look at the government today, the government has been moms since the 1960s. Until Trump came along, we've been lacking a dad. We've been lacking the guy that says, put some dirt in that cut, get up and solve your problems.
Hey, and isn't that how Jesus rolled? It's like Jesus like, yeah, let me put some dirt in that. I'm gonna put some dirt in it. You know, it's like Jesus like, oh, what, you blind? Give me some dirt.
Moreover, you just got done whipping me on a pole for hours. You know what I'm gonna do though? I'm gonna go and carry my cross. And guess what we're called to do as Christians? Carry our cross. And that includes telling people things that they don't want to hear. That's a cross to carry. That's hard. It's hard to tell somebody that you care about that you're doing something wrong. And I need to tell you this. You're doing something wrong. Change it. It doesn't mean I hate you. It means I love you. Don't you understand?
That's right, man. As the saying goes, as the saying goes, don't love somebody straight to hell. You know, tell them the truth. You know, and they selectively go with the you know, well, Jesus says to judge not, lest ye be judged, which they totally, you know, take out of context. But they also forget that Jesus says, rebuke the sinner. All right. Yeah. Now, I'm not trying to flog anybody or fine somebody or send them to, you know, to jail or send them to hell for what it is that they believe. Our job is to, you know, to say, hey, this is right, this is wrong. If it's against the law, you're going to have to pay your debt to society and stuff like that. But, you know, this is right and this is wrong. And but you know, right now the church is they're so caught up with filling the pews, and you know, and it plays out in politics too, because they're just trying to fill the polls. But you know, this Jesus that is being sold to us, you know, where the Christian community, media, you know, creation aspect is that they're really missing the glory of Jesus. If the church is kind of being caught up with adopting a liberal point of view of Jesus. Yes. It's like, man, don't go there. Liberalism, once you start taking liberties with scripture, that's where oppression and murder follows. You have to be conservative with the scriptures. Stick to the script. Do what it says. Jesus is far more glorified by who he says he is than what we're trying to make out of him. We can't build a pedestal for Jesus. Like, we're going to make this pedestal and we're going to present Jesus like this. Isn't Jesus loving and kind? And couldn't you just eat him up? Couldn't you just fall in love with this guy? It's like, no, the world is Jesus's footstool. He made it for himself. All right. We don't need to make a footstool for Jesus. He's got this. And trying to present Jesus as this, you know, hippie, all accepting hippie, it's like, no, that's not who he is. You know, and real love is for him to say, hey, you know what? These things that you're seeking your indulgences in, you know, all these things that you think make you feel good and that people should just accept about you, it's only going to bring you more pain. You ain't going to be fulfilled in it. Let me just let you know that up front. Let me save you the trouble. All this stuff that you're trying to do is wrong. Okay, now, if you can't dig that, I just tell my disciples to dust off their sandals and ease on down the road. I'll deal with you later. But I'm letting you know right now, you're living in a delusion. All right, love you, and I'll catch up with you later. All right.
I you know what? I agree with you 100%. And that was sort of the understanding that the church had in the high Middle Ages. I'm not talking about the Dark Age after the fall of Rome. I'm not talking about the Dark Age where they were doing the Inquisition or any of those horrible things that the church has done. That we all, I think we all acknowledge were wrong and not of God, and probably a breaking of the first commandment, using his name in vain. Right. What I'm talking about is that high society where people all legitimately cared about the well-being of each other's souls. And yes, there was oppression, but there was oppression from sin. And that's sort of the things that we need to call ourselves to do. Maybe not the government in the United States. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, as a community, we need to we not even oppress, because oppress isn't the right word. That implies a whole lot more than actually exists. You have the freedom to be governed. That's what people don't understand. Your freedom is to be governed in the spirit by the institutions of your choosing. This is why we have freedom of association in the United States and freedom of religion. So if I want to go live, I'm Catholic, I want to go live in Catholic town and be governed by Catholic principles in Catholic town, I can go and do that. That was the original intent of the founding documents. Many people don't know this. 5 states at the founding had a established church, because the Supreme Court of the United States only enforced the Bill of Rights over federal territories in Washington, D.C. They didn't want to get involved in states' affairs. They used this practice called judicial restraint at the time, where they knew that, but they saw that the people wanted that. At least the elected representatives wanted that in their states, and the state legislatures were voting for it, because we live in a republic, not a democracy. That's also an important side note to consider. And they basically they basically asked to be governed by their Christian principles, and they governed each other socially. There was community policing. There was so many things that cultivated a moral fabric in the American people and allowed it to continue on. Because, to be quite honest, you can't be self-governed without values. You can't self-govern without values. If you lose those values, you will descend into chaos, and you're going to live in something that Aristotle called a democracy, the second worst form of government.
Indeed, man. And you raise, something very, very important that folks should consider, is that we're governed by our consent. You know what I'm saying? It's like this is, and right now the culture has for a long time, and maybe things are shifting. It looks promising, but if we're not there to hold the line, even that promising forecast can turn ugly. But what I'm trying to say is, right now the culture hasn't been conditioned. They've been conditioned to not consent against godly governance. They end up being inundated with this idea that there's a stigma about Christianity, that we want to impose a theocracy and stuff like that. It's like, read the word of God. You are not under a threat of a theocracy from us. Trust me. We cannot establish a theocracy. The only theocracy we will accept is under the scepter of Christ. That's it. Other than that, we're not going to elect a theocracy. But the thing is, the culture has been conditioned to not consent to this kind of governance. And the thing is, man, if they really knew anything about us, man, if they knew the word of God, they would see this is the supreme article in the 10 Commandments. This is the supreme. Everything else is clauses, really. But this is the supreme article. I am the Lord your God, right? There is no truth higher than this. It's such a high truth that it is the law. It is really the law. And if you don't abide by this law, there is a penalty, right? Now, under this article, you have, I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt. What does Egypt mean? It means bondage. It's the house of slavery. That's what Egypt means. God says, I brought you up out of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Now the commandment, when we look at the 10 Commandments, and we look at the condensed version of it, it just says, you shall have no other gods before me. They're missing the big picture here. When God says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, what God is saying is that it is the law. It is the law for you to be free. Freedom is the law, man. And people don't understand. It's like, you think that we Christians are trying to take away your freedom? No, man. If you go by the 10 Commandments, it's the law that you're supposed to be free.
Exactly. And it's less about the freedom to be a transsexual demi-queer feminist that only studies intersectional theory, as opposed to someone who wants to legitimately free themselves from sin and can go somewhere to do that. That's right. What people seem to misunderstand about the essence of freedom, and it's an essence of freedom that the founders did have. Because nevertheless, even though maybe all of them weren't religious, maybe Thomas Jefferson did write a Bible where he took out all the miracles, such and such. Maybe the founders weren't all these religious Christians, but you know what they were? They were raised under Christian values. There's no doubt in my mind that a group of men that were raised by the descendants of the Puritans, probably one of the most strict religious Christian sects in the world at the time, we're going to cultivate these founders that had some sort of semblance of Christian morality when they were creating the documents that they wrote. I mean, it's so silly to say otherwise. And also consider that this country until recently has been a majority Christian nation ever since. How are you going to say that that's not what drives us? Mm-hmm. And the left is basically been trying to say we're not a Christian nation. We're not a Christian nation. while we were one, and getting us to the point where we actually won't be one, and that statement will be true. And this is the cultural Marxism that so many people are talking about these days. This idea that all cultures are equal. This idea that there's this, that we need to accept every culture. I'm like, I'm sorry, but a culture that rebels against Christ, a culture that rebels against Christianity is not a worthy culture, and it's a worse culture, and it should be repelled.
Indeed, man. You know, it's and yeah, especially when people try to tell us that, you know, people should be able to believe whatever it is they want. You shouldn't question their beliefs. And for some reason, it's always Christians who are seen as, you know, the ones judging other people's beliefs and stuff like that. And I'm like, you know, hey, why don't you hold that? Well, I guess they don't. Because, like, say, for instance, we're not supposed to question anybody's beliefs. It's okay, well, Muslims believe that they're supposed to kill Christians and they're supposed to kill Jews and people who aren't Muslims. Why don't you go question their beliefs? You know, but at the same time, well, it just so happens that they don't question their beliefs. But I think it's horrible that they overlook the most judgmental religion and don't question their beliefs, but they question us. You know, and that kind of thing, you know, that sort of stuff is almost supernatural to me. That kind of to not be able to see that. When people are able to make this, what do they call it, moral equivalence or whatever, and this double standard is selective outrage, when they can overlook something like that and somehow stigmatize us for it, man, that's just not something in the natural. That's like supernaturally blind, you know? And it's like that kind of thing, that's going to
well, it asks you. It begs the question, what supernatural entity is guiding that force, you know? It's obviously not. It's obviously not the purest form of good, which would be God, you know, because all good things are God, and so you know you have to ask yourself that. And basically, I think that there are two demons in our lives, and they're the demons of and I think that Satan's the demon of disorder. I think, in my opinion, he's the one that's disorderly. But I think that the two other major demons that exist in the world are what causes the disorder. And I think that the first is, you know, the improper usage of mind, knowledge, and the improper usage of mind, knowledge, and basically everything else. And then the other demon is material pleasure. And a lot of people seem to not understand those. You know, and obviously, like I said, the devil, anti-God, anti-ordered soul. That's disorder. And the whole point is that the hierarchy of the soul, this is going back to my philosophy of life, is that I'm an Augustinian. I call myself an Augustinian nationalist because I believe that society should be organized under an Augustinian sentiment, and that it should underpin the society, and that we should be proud of that as a nation. Besides that point, the hierarchy that exists is with God and the order of your soul being your top priority in life. That's the highest. Those are the highest goods. The lowest goods are the powers of the soul, which would be, you know, mind, knowledge, those wisdom, those sorts of pursuits. And then the lowest goods would be material pleasures. And any disorder of that hierarchy, any misunderstanding of how you're supposed to organize your thoughts, how you're supposed to organize your actions, and how you're supposed to exercise your will, is a perversion of the hierarchy that's going to plummet you into disorder and sin.
Indeed, man. You know, and when we look at how things are sold to us, you know, in entertainment and these things that people justify in taking advantage of what you're talking about, Satan's name, it means the accuser. And entertainment, you know, when media, what is it mostly? It's stylized accusations. That's what it is, right? Just like we were talking about earlier, the bad guys are going to be your Christians and your Republicans, and back then it was Bush or it was Reagan. Now it's Trump. You know, you got to make these people look like the bad guy. You have to accuse them, right?
Well, now it's even more. It's whites now. It's white
again.
Like you see the movies now. I just watched a movie where this guy's walking around in the south side of Chicago, getting attacked by these white punk rocker dudes. I'm like, that's not the south side of Chicago. That doesn't exist.
And you kind of live there, right?
Yeah, I live in Chicago. Like, that's not at all what it's like there.
It's slander. That's what the devil's name means. He's the accuser. He's the slanderer, right? And once you wage an accusation, I mean, once you put that on somebody, man, you destroy them. That's it. Mankind has been destroying each other with accusations since, since the garden. But, and you're right, man. Right now, well, white people have become the enemy again. And this is what I've been trying to tell conservatives. And it kind of goes over their head. And it's like, I guess they lose their stamina as far as they're concerned. They don't seem to understand that this race card, this race baiting, is the biggest weapon that the Democrats have. You might need to take that thing out. You can't avoid it, right? And you're going to have to get creative and resourceful on how to fight back against it. And the thing that with conservatives, they get so once that accusation hits, they start to get defensive about their color. They forget. Yep. It's like, dude, don't let them make it about you being white, because there was an institution of apartheid in America, and it was authored by the Democrat Party. You gotta point them to the Democrat Party. It's like, yes, there were white people who were racist, and when they picked representatives to take their racist policies into office, they voted Democrat. It's like, there's your white people. If you want to be mad at some white folks, there you go. All right. Don't let them try with the whole party switch nonsense. None of that stuff adds up, and conservatives, they need to get versed on that. The whole party switch thing, it's like, hey, first up, rebuke the devil because he's coming with slander. Democrat Party is the party of slander. And people are going to try that there was some party switch thing. It's like, okay, if you're going to say that there was a party switch, you have to admit in the first place, Democrat Party was the racist party. So you're already making an admission to that. Number one. Number two, if Democrats party were this party that switched and they were this racist party who were trying to keep black folks down and all that sort of stuff and had been doing the black folks dirty, you mean to tell me that you're going to believe them when they told you that they switched? Don't believe the devil, man. It's like we talk about white devils and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, there are white devils. They're Democrats. So other than that, let's not make it this generality of white people but that's what they're trying to do. That's what the entertainment culture is trying to do. They're trying to demonize white people and demonize them in general. It's like, no, don't accept this. Don't let them pull this on you, and be ready, with the sword of the Lord to fight back against that slander.
Now, one of the things I'd like to clarify on, and I'm sure you actually agree with me on this, is that, the Democrats in the South are Republican. Like, the descendants of the racists in the South are Republicans today in the South. They're ancestors. They're obviously that group of Republicans. It's not Southern Democrats that are doing that. Now, that's not to say that they're all racist still. It's just to say that that's the trajectory that they chose to go through. And I think that a lot of Republicans, but I do think where you're right is that the idea that the Democrats push of, well, we have to act as a race. We have to act as a race to plunge ourselves forward. That's a philosophy that's largely been pushed by the Democrat Party. Now they use minorities instead of white people. But now that's happening again. They're using this. They're blaming white people now instead of to bolster their black, Hispanic, and other minority group support against white people. And what you get from that is you now create those racial insecurities in people, and you get things like the alt-right. And you see these guys coming up, and I talk to them. They literally believe that the left, and some of these minority groups are out to make them go extinct. They think that these people are working against them, and basically promoting their ethnic extinction. And if you actually believe that, that's dangerous. That's scary. That's scary for somebody to think that way. That would be
the objective of the Democrat Party has always been, since the Republican Party was founded, the objective of the Democrat Party was to make the Republican Party, the Democrat Party their objective has been to make the Republican Party extinct. They've always hated Republicans. so that hasn't changed. You know, with Democrats, you know, who have become Republican voters, you know, when people talk about, you know, Democrats left the Democrat Party or your Dixiecrats, and so, well, Dixiecrats, they all went back to the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
Democrats who left the Democrat Party to become Republicans, they left their racist sentiments. Right? It's like, it doesn't make sense that you got the Republican Party that ended slavery, the segregation laws, Jim Crow's, you know, won the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense that Democrats who had been opposed to these things would say, hey, you know what, I want to be a Republican now. That doesn't even make sense, regardless of, you know, this Southern strategy that they're talking about and stuff like that.
Well, it wasn't the Southern strategy. Yeah, it wasn't the Southern strategy. That's a lie. I agree with you on that. It was the industrialization of the South.
You know, and like I said, if that stuff was really true, I mean, Goldwater would have won if there was this big exodus that they were talking about. But the thing is, you know, you had these people who said, you know what it is that the Democrats believe in terms of these policies, we don't believe it anymore. And with this movement, you would think that, well, if they carried all these same sentiments into the Republican Party, then all those apartheid institutions would have stayed in. And hey, shoot, we got the Republican majority now. Let's bring back those lynching laws. You know, let's go ahead and bring back those segregation laws. We got the Republican Party now, and we can make them do whatever. But that never happened. It's like, is there still racism? Sure, there's this social racism, you know, that people really want to make a mountain out of a molehill with. But there's not the institutionalized racism. All right, it's not legal for people to go ahead and act on these things, and that ended when the Republican Party took over, when those became red states.
Yeah, and I think you're largely correct on that. I'm not seeing it. And the social racism that people are talking about is like, well, some, you know, when I was younger, some white guy was angry at my mom, or some white guy was angry at me, and they called me the N-word or something like that. I'm like, nah, that sucks. That was a mean thing to say. And I have to ask though, is like, I've had people angry at me that said they wish my mother aborted me and stuff like that too. I mean, it was like, who cares, dude? Walk away. It doesn't matter. Like, I get it. I get it. Like that's a mean thing to say. It's a really mean thing to say, and they shouldn't have said that. That's wrong. That's completely disrespectful. But welcome to the real world. People are going to say disrespectful things to you, and that doesn't give you a right to, you know, to just to go wild and yell systemic racism. Because first off, there is no system of white people going around calling black people the N-word. There's no systemic policy in place that pushes police officers to go and shoot African Americans or anything like that. That's the narrative they're trying to push. And it's just not true. There is
definitely a system, an industry. I don't know about a system, but there's an industry of black people going around calling each other N-word a lot, and some make a whole lot of money doing it. But you know, with the black community, that's one of the things, you know, when we're trying to, as we're exploring, you know, Christianity, the arts, and Christianity, the culture, with the black community, it's like, look, man, one of the things that makes it so hard for us to get ahead is that we're just constantly pushed. This idea is pushed on us, but for some reason that this has only happened to us. You know, it's like as if we're the only people who have ever experienced oppression or say, it's like, dude, that's touched everybody. Yeah. You know, it's like it makes us look weak and pathetic when we're still crying about it. It's like, you know, if you get your mind into the kingdom, you want to talk about oppression. You look at the early Christians. That's some oppression, right? That is it's like you talk about getting dragged out of your home and stoned for believing in God. It's like, how's that for oppression? It's like, well, you know, they're doing this to us because we're black. Yeah, they were doing that to them because they were Christian. You know, it's like, just
remember the lions, you know, in Rome, they literally feed you to animals.
Made them in the candles, man, so they can light up their gardens. Say, hey, dip that Christian in wax and light them up so I can have some light. You know, it's like, come on. If you want to talk about oppression, if we see these things through a kingdom mindset, but that's why, and I'm not trying to make this about color or anything like that, but unfortunately, that's where liberals live. They keep making this, you know, the whole white privilege thing. It's like, hey, you know what? You want to know where white privilege comes from? It comes from Democrats. That's what the white privilege that y'all are angry about. That was Democrats making policy that made white people privileged and made black folks have to go drink over here. Or that said, you know what? We can have regular white folks over here, but you Irish? Nah, Nina. No Irish need apply. Okay, they were the ones who were making these laws that said that you can't have this or you can't have this, but these special white people can. Democrats did that. And so, but if we look at it from a kingdom mindset, then we can take ourselves out of it and say, you know what? You know what? It ain't just about me. Everybody. This is about everybody, you know, and that's who Christ died for. And people need to remember that. And then from there, we can move ahead.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think somebody in the chat actually just made a really good point, and I want to bring it up. Malar Snow says, something I've noticed that no one talks about is that Democrats left God to worship science, left science to worship celebrities, and are now moving to worship personal oppression. And that's true. They're now elevating people of underprivilege as the archetype of a good person, and people who are oppressed are certainly not always good people.
Hey, really quick to my, I'm sorry, man, just to say to Mylar, as they're saying, nobody talks about this. You'll be happy to know, excuse me, in this next coming Sledge album, I got 2 songs that address that, exactly what you're talking about. So, hey, that's God in agreement, or God being in the midst of our agreement right there. So, hope that's good news for you.
Yeah, no, and that's great. So I think we've covered quite a bit in this discussion that we've been having, and a lot of it really explains a lot of what's going on here. And I think that the best way to fix it is to promote ourselves, to sell to the culture, to adapt with the times, to make good music that is inspiring, that is creative, that actually pushes a good message, but is still cool. Like the way that Christians do message, hippie Jesus isn't cool. Hippie Jesus is lame. He's lame.
Amen.
When I read Revelation and I read about what Jesus does, he comes out of heaven with a sword in his, a flaming sword in his mouth, riding out on a white horse from heaven, about to, push justice onto the sinners of the world who have tainted the world with sin. Right. I just think, whoa, that's awesome. Imagine a metal song about that.
Right? We got those, man. 20 Pound Sledge, next album is coming with that. It's like, don't get me wrong, because I'm not all pro-war Jesus and stuff like that. That's not what I'm saying.
But a just Jesus is what you're saying.
Just Jesus. That's what I'm talking about, man. And it's like Jesus is coming with that, and we're just trying to tell people, it's like, dude, you don't want to be on the business end of his wrath, man. You don't want to be that guy, because this love that he's coming, he's talking about, I'm coming with that love that is going to punish those who have been wicked to other people. Is really what it comes down to. That's how it's like, yo, Jesus is coming for his get back, man. And it's like, thank you, Jesus, for having my back. And yeah, Jesus is loving, man. It's like, but he don't love our BS. He loves us, but he doesn't love our BS and what we think that, what we're doing, it doesn't harm anybody else. Yes, it does. Anybody who harms other people, they either don't think it harms somebody else, or they don't care that it harms somebody else.
Well, that's an easy thing to say when you don't believe in any sort of spiritual being at all whatsoever. When everything's just material, yeah, what you do with your stuff doesn't affect anybody else. But when you realize you invite people in your home, you socialize with these people, you could be advising them to do things that really damage their soul and their spiritual being. And honestly, that's the most important part of you. If you have a tainted spirit, you're doomed forever. If you have a tainted body, you can still have a great soul and receive eternal life in the end. So what's more important?
Word.
And yeah, and going back to what you were talking about with what we should do with songs, I want to bring this up before we stop, because this is cool. I want everybody to listen to this song. One of my favorite songs about Christianity is "Creeping Death" by Metallica. That song really shows who God is. That song shows who God is. That's not hippie. That's not hippie Jesus. That's not the 20-year-old woman with a beard going around saying that I love everybody. It's all good. You can do what you want. Don't judge anybody. That's not what it is. That is literally one of the it's about the Exodus. It is one of the darkest stories in the Bible, and it tells it from the perspective of a metal story about the Exodus, and it is so creative. It is so good, and it's one of my favorite songs. It covers the whole story. It's beautiful. It's composed well, and it really shows. And I think that more metal musicians need to do this. I never understood why they got to be satanic. That's dumb. I never got into that. I really don't even like the bands that are satanic. I've never heard a song that I liked by groups like that. But more like a band in the mainstream, like why isn't there a metal band that's making dark stories from the Bible? Because that's what metal's usually telling, is a dark story. Let's make that happen. And that's what 20 Pound Sledge is doing. And that's why I love the group, is that it talks about the struggles of being a Christian, the struggles of doing those sorts of things. And I, like I said, I respect you for that. And you know, if there's any, by the way, and we're gonna bring the show to a close now, but if there's anything else you want to say about it, please check out his band, guys. It's great.
Thank you, man. And exactly, like, you know, with Creeping Death, you know, with God coming in, you know, and that's one of the things that we need to promote in the culture. It's like, understand, when people try to say that, oh, God is pro-slavery and God is this and that and God is that, it's like, really? Have you read Exodus? God is hardly pro-slavery. Did you see what he did to the Egyptians for enslaving the Hebrews? God is not pro-slavery at all. And yeah, we need creative means to put that out there. And out of the darkness does come the light, you know? And yeah, we show these aspects of God, not to show that, you know, because when we talk about, you know, like you were saying about Satanists and music and stuff, like that stuff's not hardcore. That stuff is weak. Yeah. Obviously, you have not explored who Jesus is. You want to talk about somebody who's hardcore. Hey, the devil ain't going to get on the cross for us for being hardcore. Jesus will. Jesus is hardcore. All right. So it's like, you know, and when you want to talk about love, you want to talk about the most hardcore form of love and practical and redeeming love. I'm not talking about obsessive, crazy, something that somebody calls love. I'm talking about the kind of love that is a one act that does it all kind of love that none of us can match. You know, and that love is done by Jesus, and that is some serious hardcore stuff.
No, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And like I said, I wish you the best of luck in your musical pursuits. I wish you luck in promoting these ideas in art. I want to see more like you come about. And I think that once we get a handle on these strategic institutions and entertainment in Hollywood, that we'll actually find ourselves in a better place as a culture. I really do. And until that happens, we're going to continue to devolve into, you know, hedonism, disorder, chaos, hate, and just wickedness. But it was great having you. It was great having you on, Zo. I love this conversation. It was great. I would love to have you on again at some point in the future as well. Or I'd love to come on your podcast, whichever you want to do. I love this. This was great. It's great to have you.
Right on, man. Thank you. Most enjoyable, man. And Godspeed. And yeah, look forward to doing it again.
Awesome.